I hate giving a backstory, but I realize some of it is necessary to tell the story I want to tell. What I look like, what Stephanie looks like, that isn't important. Use your imagination to fill in those blanks with yourself and the love of your life. Stephanie and I found each other mutually attractive. What happened was not based on looks. It's a story about love. I'm married to Stephanie. Others called her Steph, but I never did. I found that name beautiful. She also called me Robert, even though everybody else called me just plain Bob. Our pet names for each other were our formal names. This part becomes important later. My hobby is astronomy. I like looking at the stars, as well as the planets in our solar system. I have an assortment of telescopes. Some people have a lot of guns, some people have a lot of vinyl records, and I have every telescope I ever bought. I get the new ones just like anyone who likes the latest version of things gets the newest one. If you'd have asked me a few months ago if anything was wrong in our marriage, I would have told you, fuck yeah. Something had seemed off recently. Stephanie and I had been married for 3 years. We were discussing the right time to have kids. We had a wondrous moment when we both decided it was time. For 2 months it was all we talked about. And then, she suddenly didn't want to talk about it. Our sex life, which had been frantic with the excitement of baby making, didn't go back to what it had been before. It became more of a ritual. It wasn't cold. It seemed to be mutually satisfying, but the intensity wasn't there. Then 3 weeks ago, the intimacy just stopped. I assumed it was because of female problems I could never understand, or the fact she was having second thoughts. Both of my theories were wrong. I returned after work at my usual time. Nothing really tipped me off for what was to follow. There was no strange car in the driveway. There was a strange one parked on the street, but I didn't realize that part until later. I walked in to see my wife and a man I'd never seen before on our couch. I would normally refer to it as the couch, but what I saw is the reason I describe it differently. They were sitting together holding hands. This was unusual. Stephanie usually let me know whenever someone was dropping in. I was hoping this was some distant relative I'd never met. "Hi, honey, is someone joining us for dinner tonight?" Stephanie said, "Robert, please take a seat. I've got something to tell you." I took a seat in the chair across from the couch. This was weird, but I wasn't assuming it was the one thing it looked like. Not until Stephanie spoke again. "Nigel and I have fallen in love." Well, that removed all doubt. I was silent for a moment, processing this. While I was doing that, she looked over at the strange man. She was looking at him in the way she used to look at me. He was looking at her the same way. There was no doubt she was telling the truth. I had just one question, so I asked it. "Who the fuck is Nigel?" The person who I assumed was Nigel spoke. "I am. I know this is awkward for both of you. I'm just here to ease the pain of this disclosure. This is painful for her." Obviously, easing the pain meant only Stephanie's pain. My pain wasn't eased at all, so that didn't exactly help. Stephanie spoke next. "I met Nigel at work. I didn't mean for it to happen, it just happened." I really thought I was calm when I said, "How does something like this just happen?" Nigel asserted himself and said loudly, "Don't raise your voice to her. She is an angel." Stephanie stared deeply into his eyes and said, "Thank you, Pookie. I'm here for you always, Pocahontas," she replied. I was stunned. It was like having a concussion. I used to play rugby, so I used that word from experience. What I was feeling was the equivalent of a knee to the head. I was completely disoriented. My next words reflected that. I once again kept my emotions suppressed and said in a conversational tone, "Maybe there is a way we could work this out. I've read stories about women who can be in love with 2 people at once. There's this romantic story where a woman is in love with 2 men. We should read that together before any rash decisions are made." Nigel jumped off the couch. "Quit yelling at her. Stop torturing this wonderful woman." Stephanie grabbed his hand and pulled him back to the couch. "Thank you for defending me, my knight." Then she kissed him. A small peck on the lips that would have previously meant nothing. Then she looked at me with a mixture of compassion and sadness. "I can't love 2 men. That's not for me. I can only give my heart to one person at a time. I fell out of love with you as I fell into love with Nigel. Can't we talk about this?" "We could go into counseling," I replied. Nigel was clutching her hand when she responded. It would just drag out the pain. "Robert, my heart knows what it wants. I still have love for you and I always will. I just don't love you the same way anymore. A clean break will be the easiest for both of us. But we were planning on having kids just a few months ago. I don't understand." Stephanie looked at me with all the compassion in the world. "That's why I have to do this. I want children to be conceived in love." Nigel spoke again. "They'll be our love babies." "Oh, Pookie," she replied. Then they gave each other an Eskimo kiss. I really didn't think they could have done something more nauseating if they had tried. I was about to speak when Stephanie looked over at me and spoke first. "Robert, I know this is hard, and thank you for being so supportive during what I know was a painful moment for you. I'll be back later to pick up my things, and I really hope we can talk as friends." I was still wondering how my calm demeanor somehow was interpreted as supportive while they both got up and left. I certainly wasn't supporting any of this. I guess they had said what they had come to say, and I was an afterthought. Nigel got into his car, and she got into hers. It was the practical thing to do, of course, since she needed to take her car. Still, I don't think I could have handled seeing them leave in the same car together. I've always considered myself blessed with a very good memory. That night it felt more like a curse. I was replaying everything Stephanie had said to me over the last 6 months. I'd never heard of Nigel. I had no idea who he was. She had fallen in love with someone else and had an affair, and I never had the slightest clue. How had I missed it? There certainly had been the signs I mentioned earlier that something wasn't right. Now I could put those things in context. She'd fallen out of love with me. That explained the changing sex. She'd cut me off completely the last 3 weeks. I concluded that was around the time she and Nigel had consummated their mutual desire. She had said she could have only one love at a time. That was when she likely gave her heart and body to him. I was still trying to process everything when I got the call from the hospital. Stephanie had been in another car accident. Yes, another. Stephanie always had a lead foot. A year ago, she'd rear-ended someone on her way back from work when traffic had come to a sudden stop. She was physically fine. She was emotionally shaken up. She'd lost consciousness when the airbag deployed. She wasn't even hospitalized for that one. This one was more serious. She was taken to the hospital because she was unconscious when she was discovered by the EMT. I was told she'd run a red light at full speed, then swerved to avoid an oncoming car. She'd wound up driving into the side of a jack-in-the-box. That information had come from Nigel, apparently. He certainly didn't phone me and disclose that. I got that information from the staff. I was still processing everything when Nigel approached me. Yeah, he was there too. He'd gotten there before me, but I hadn't seen him until then. He didn't express mutual grief or offer what would have been an unwelcome hug. He didn't say anything like, "Hey," or "Let's talk." He just went to what was on his mind. "Bob, I can't see her since I'm not family. You know she was leaving you for me, so I'd appreciate it if you let me in. You have to approve it. I'm technically not family, but I am her family." Technically. Given that approach, I gave my response. It was easy. No. If I was you, I'd let her go. I'd be looking to move on. "Let me comfort her," he answered. "No," I answered. "Are you really going to be an asshole at a time like this?" "Yes," I replied. With that, I turned my back on him and walked towards Stephanie's room. He was definitely right. I was being an asshole. I didn't feel bad about it at all, not even a little bit. I barely had time to deal with the hurt when Stephanie announced she was leaving. I hadn't even had time to get to the anger stage. After seeing Nigel and listening to him, grief was turning to anger now. I couldn't very well lash out at my wife after she'd been in an accident, so being an asshole toward Nigel would do nicely for the moment. I needed answers, and I hoped I'd get them. Until I did, Pookie was not getting anywhere near her. The fact that he felt pain was a bit of a balm to me at that moment. I was intercepted by Dr. Beller. He looked the part of the wise and experienced doctor. His gray hair gave me comfort that he was a fountain of knowledge. He told me my wife likely had amnesia from what he was able to tell. Otherwise, she was physically fine, just like the last traffic accident. Mentally, though, this one was different. Outside of soap operas, I had no idea what that really meant. What I learned from television was I should whack her on the head again to bring her memories back. I soon learned that soap operas shouldn't be treated as medically accurate. Dr. Beller was very doctor-like in dumbing it down for me. She has retrograde amnesia. I didn't know there were different types. There's also a version called anterograde amnesia. People who have that can't make new memories. Have you ever seen a movie called 50 First Dates? I have. It's actually a criminally underrated Adam Sandler movie, I replied. All Adam Sandler movies are underrated. We'll have to agree to disagree on that. No point in pissing him off, he was her doctor after all. So if she doesn't have that kind, what kind does my wife have, I asked. She has the kind more people have some familiarity with. She can't remember anything after a certain point. She will still make new memories. Is it permanent, I asked. It rarely is. Usually memories do return. It's extremely rare that they never do. How long does it take for them to return? I asked. It varies. It could happen this week. It could take a year. It could take longer. So at any moment she could just suddenly remember everything, I asked. That's a possibility. It could also happen that she begins to remember certain things but not everything. She gradually remembers more and more things. So what you're saying is, you really have no idea what's going to happen, I asked. That's what I'm saying. Also, you should give the Waterboy another chance. Adam Sandler is a comedic genius. I will. Apparently anybody can become a doctor these days. So much for putting faith in gray hair. I was let in to see my wife. She was awake and alert, as well as confused. Robert. What happened? The doctors tell me only I was in an accident. I grabbed her outstretched hand and she gave mine a squeeze. I squeezed back. What's the last thing you remember? I was coming home from the office. The car in front of me had stopped, but I didn't hit the brakes in time. Her memories seemed to go back to the accident a year ago before this. This was pre-Nigel, from what I'd gathered. It was also interesting to me that her memories returned to the other accident. Had she suffered some serious injury then as well that the doctors hadn't detected? Or was this a coincidence? These were thoughts to discuss with the doctors another time. Or not. Right now I was in the moment. Stephanie, you got into another accident the day you left me. I left you. Why would I ever do that? She replied. You told me you were in love with Nigel. Nigel? Who the fuck is Nigel? She answered. He's someone you know from work. I don't know anybody from work named Nigel, she replied. That was interesting. Either Nigel was new there or she had lied to me about how they met. Look, I don't want to agitate you. We can talk about this another time. You can't just drop a bomb like that and not talk about it. My first thought was, that's exactly what you did to me, you harlot. There was no point in saying that or walking out to spite her for something that she didn't remember. I took the high road. Barely. I told her the story the same way I'd heard it from her. She interrupted several times and came close to accusing me of lying. She couldn't seem to wrap her head around anything I was saying. Once again, that's exactly how I'd felt when she and Nigel declared their mutual love to me earlier that day. She was filled with questions I couldn't answer, like, were you cheating on me? No, Stephanie, I never have and never would, I replied. Did you beat me or something? Same answer as last time, I replied. Then why would I do this without any reason? I kissed her hand. Stephanie, just recover. We have time to talk about this. I'm glad you're okay. Stephanie was kept in the hospital for a few days while the doctors ran tests. I was there every day after work. So was Nigel. Every time I walked in, he would say something like, Bob, can we talk? No, I replied. Bob, you know that. No, I replied. Stephanie eventually was cleared to come back home. Both of us were briefed about what to expect. Stephanie was fine both mentally and physically. Her memories were likely to come back, possibly slowly, possibly all at once. I'd heard it before. She'd heard it before. At this point, Stephanie just wanted to go home. I wanted that too. So we nodded and agreed and signed forms without reading them, just to get the fuck out of there. As we were nodding and signing, Dr. Beller mentioned she could go to work, but her lack of memory could make it difficult. He suggested she might want to take a different job in a similar field. I simply said, Thank you, Dr. Beller, for all you've done. We want to go home now. 5 minutes later, we did just that. We slept comfortably in each other's arms that night. I didn't want to let go of her. It was like having a piece ripped out of me that had suddenly been restored. I never wanted to lose it again. I slept more soundly since this whole thing started. When I awakened, we were still intertwined. While I did breathe easier when I had my beloved safe and secure under our roof once again, it doesn't mean I was completely at ease. From what Dr. Beller had said, this situation could change at any time. I wasn't sure how big a window I had to come up with a permanent solution, but I had a second chance here and had no intention of just wasting it by doing nothing while the clock ran out. There were deep philosophical issues to consider, of course. Things like, if Stephanie could fall out of love with me so quickly once, did I really want her back? Things like, should I look a gift horse in the mouth? I've never really been into philosophy, so I ignored those thoughts and concentrated on the task in front of me. I needed Nigel out of the picture before I could figure out anything else. That problem was difficult enough. Stephanie wouldn't consider leaving her job. She loved her job. She was also good at it. She'd called her boss and explained the situation with her memory. Her boss was sympathetic and welcomed her back. She told her she'd make it work. I was supportive of her returning, however. I still knew nothing about Nigel. A lot of affairs start at work. From the little I knew, so had this one. This was definitely going to be an issue if he really was someone she worked with. If Nigel was a co-worker, she'd run into him again. If he was, there was the possibility he'd worm his way into her heart again. She did go back to work despite my reservations. It seemed she had been honest with me about how they met. Nigel was indeed a co-worker. Stephanie told me she got a nice welcome back reception. Everyone seemed to want to do everything they could do to assist her. They had all been informed of her memory loss. Only one person had made her feel uncomfortable. Nigel. His way of welcoming her back was different. He kept wanting to talk to her alone and kept breaking physical boundaries she was not comfortable with from a co-worker, much less a stranger. She had gotten plenty of hugs, but Nigel was the only one that sniffed her hair. Stephanie told me she drew boundaries very quickly. He didn't seem to have gotten the memo. He kept wanting to hold her hand or put his arm around her. All this did was piss Stephanie off. The company where she worked didn't have any kind of non-fraternization policy for co-workers. Fortunately for me, it did have a strict sexual harassment policy. I realize I did say, fortunately for me, I still wasn't ready to think. Fortunately for us, not yet. Nigel got summoned into a meeting by Human Resources and was given the usual company lecture about the policy and told he needed to cease and desist. He also got reprimanded by his supervisor and told he needed to cease and desist. Nigel neither ceased nor desisted. The first thing he did after his dressing down was to confront Stephanie in full view of a lot of witnesses. Instead of talking, he grabbed her and started kissing her. I assumed he'd been expecting muscle memory or something to result in her kissing him back, rather than the slap that followed and the kick to the groin. Nigel was fired for cause. That didn't end him trying to see her. He showed up in the parking lot at work. He showed up if she left to go to lunch. It got so bad she got a restraining order against him. This did a lot to alleviate my concern that the affair might be rekindled. It's hard to have sex from 500 feet away. I did enjoy seeing my wife's paramour suffer. I also enjoyed resuming the relationship with my wife I thought we'd always had. Stephanie was back for the moment, but I knew that could change if her memories returned. Even if they didn't, would something in her nature cause her to suddenly feel the same way about another man? One night I was looking at the stars on the balcony with one of my older telescopes. I did that from time to time because I liked thinking of myself as Galileo and wanting to see if I could see what he saw. I could not have drawn the conclusions that he'd drawn, but I wanted to be able to. When I got frustrated, I pointed the telescope at the neighborhood, as I have often done. Damned if I didn't see Nigel in the bushes. Stephanie came out on the balcony and asked what I was looking at. I just told her to look into the telescope. Oh, that is some serious creeper shit. Should I call the cops? Oh no. He wants something to watch. Let's give him something to watch. What do you mean? I want him to see me make love to you. I want him to know you're mine. He'll see you and I naked. You told me he already has. No, just you. I don't think he's ever seen me naked. Then it's time he did my hunk. I want him to see what he can never hope to compete against. Let's let him see something from me he will never get or see again. Let's show him two people in a love that can't ever be equaled. Talk about pressure. It should have been difficult for me. It wasn't. Her enthusiasm was contagious. Hell, it was hot. It had been years since our foreplay had been that intense. We kissed, petted each other lovingly, then kissed again and again. At this point, I had no idea if Nigel was still watching. I hoped he was. I also didn't care. We both were in the moment, enjoying the touches and tastes of each other in a way we hadn't done in years. We started slowly, both of us knowing we were being watched. Soft touches with our mouths and fingertips. Soft murmurs of approval. Nigel screamed. Nuhu. We should have our babies. Our babies. Apparently, that was the straw that broke the camel's back for Nigel. He chose that moment to burst from concealment. Pocahontas, please stop. I love you. At that point, we were no longer paying attention. I wanted nothing more at that moment than to have an orgasm. By the look on her face, she wanted the same. I can always tell when she's in the moment. She never looks at me. Her eyes go everywhere else but looking at me. Nigel, realizing his words were barely heard, decided to make a non-verbal statement with action. That statement was made by crashing through our glass door. He really could have just pulled the door open. It wasn't locked. I supposed he wanted to waste no time finding out. I like to think we both came when we heard the glass shatter. I think we both came at the same time. I didn't even bother to get dressed and raced downstairs. Despite what we see in the movies, it seems that throwing your body full force into a pane of glass doesn't leave you unmarked. Based on the screams, it seems it's also painful. Nigel was one hell of a mess. He was halfway in and halfway out, struggling to extricate himself from the glass. I grabbed his hand and yanked him in. He screamed again. His clothing was ripped and his exposed flesh had lacerations all over. Rather than thanking me, he yelled, "Get your hands off me." I wasn't even touching him after I pulled him in while he lay prostrate on the floor. He really seemed unappreciative of the fact he was bleeding and making stains. The area was tiled, but it still would have to be cleaned up. I called 911. At that time, I thought it was a medical emergency. Nigel looked like he'd lost a fight with a chainsaw. After the conversation with the 911 operator, though, I did realize that I was also reporting a crime. I also lived in a city where reporting a crime could result in the person reporting the crime being arrested or shot. Let's just call that city Baltimore. This was one of those situations where I might have been handcuffed and spent a night in a cell because the police just arrested everybody on the scene and let the judicial system sort it out. 2 policemen arrived. One was a fairly large and impressive guy. The other was a smaller woman that gave me the feeling you wouldn't want to fuck with her. While both Nigel and I were told to get down and stay down, Nigel once again tipped the scale in my favor. While we were both in the process of being cuffed, he yelled out to Stephanie, Pocahontas, "I'll be back to save you." The larger cop was Officer Whitecloud. That's all he and his partner needed to hear. I did hope he'd be promoted someday so that he'd eventually be Chief Whitecloud. As the dust settled, the court decided that Nigel had violated a restraining order. He'd also been guilty of breaking and entering on top of that. Nigel was going to be out of our lives for a while. It didn't hurt when Officer Whitecloud took the stand that he mentioned Pocahontas in front of the most liberal judge who could have presided over the case. Did I mention the judge was also a woman who hated stalking? I wanted to kiss her at that moment, but didn't want to push my luck. Nigel went to jail. Oh, not forever. He got a sentence of 2 years and served 3 months. That was still an unexpectedly harsh sentence. He was now a felon. That would put a crimp in his future. He finally seemed to have gotten the message because there was no further communication from Pookie. That was one problem out of the way. There was still the ticking time bomb of her memories returning. I selfishly didn't want that to happen. Given how she now thought about Nigel, I don't think that would have been good for her either. Still, we had to go toward the future prepared for it. I had no doubt if it ever happened we'd be together. I also had no doubt it would be a complication we didn't need. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up and drop a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm push my content further. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep creating more stories for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. I just got the private investigator report. This is the 4th investigation in as many years. Jason Thomas, the private investigator, handled this one. I had used 4 different private investigator firms in the last 4 years, using random cities and times, thinking my wife and her lover had fooled the previous ones, but this new investigator would find they're cheating. I just got off the phone with Mr. Thomas. He told me that his people here and his associates in Dallas had surveilled both my wife Molly and John Decker for a week, both when they were at their office the first 4 days of the week, and in Dallas where they attended a work seminar for 3 days. My wife Molly was the administrative assistant to John Decker, CEO of a fully owned subsidiary of a major international company. As an admin assistant, she generally traveled with him, and he traveled a lot. Mr. Thomas said he would send a written report, but in general he found. For the 4 days locally before their trip to Dallas, they were followed and observed. They had lunch together all 4 days, then immediately returned to work. On the second day, they stopped at a local bar after work. Each had 2 drinks, and then went to their respective homes. Their spouses were home when they got there, and we broke off surveillance, assuming the spouses would be aware of their activities until the next morning. On the other 3 days, they both went directly home from work, and their spouses were there when they arrived. The Dallas trip was slightly more interesting, but not much. Each of the 3 days they attended the work seminar as they should have. They ate dinner together each night and went out dancing. After about an hour of dancing and drinks, they went to their respective hotel rooms and didn't come out until morning. Their 2 rooms were separated by 10 rooms, so there was no connecting door between them. A camera pointed down the hall showed that neither left their room until the next morning. The only thing that was at all suspicious was their dancing. My agent described it as looking like two people in love. There was no inappropriate touching, but certainly a closeness, and he usually had his arm around her all the way back to their table. They were followed to the airport, and the agent made sure that they boarded and that the airplane did, in fact, leave for home. 4 private investigator reports at random dates over the last 4 years have found basically the same information. Nothing. Molly and I are both 36 and have been married for 15 years. We were exclusive for the last 3 years of college and married shortly after graduation. Molly is a doll, not beautiful, but would be considered pixie cute, with a fantastic 5 foot 6 inches body. She is very outgoing and people enjoy having her around. Her boss, John Decker, is about my size, 6 foot 1 inch, 190 pounds, but if it was between the two of us, John would get the attention of all the girls. He is quite an attractive man. I have talked to Molly a few times about her apparent closeness with John Decker. The first few times, she said there was nothing between them except work. She promised that she would never fool around behind my back and even offered to take a lie detector test anytime I wanted. She said he was just a coworker and a good friend. The last time we talked about it, she referred to him as a special friend. I guess he got a promotion. Molly and I have gone out for dinner and dancing a few times with John and his wife Gail. John and Molly talk to each other and dance with each other much more than they do with their spouses. One time, when John and Molly went out on the dance floor, I noticed Gail gave them a raised eyebrow as if saying, "What?" Again, I guess she notices their closeness also. I have talked to Molly about finding another job just for me because I am very jealous of her being so close to John. She says, "That's silly." She loves her job and tells me again that she would never go behind my back and that she would be willing to take a lie detector test. I have spent thousands of dollars on private investigators over 4 years and found nothing. Last night, Molly was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked by. In a more serious tone than usual, she said, "Tom, can I talk to you for a minute?" When I sat down, she said, "John and Gail have invited us to their lake house for the weekend. I told them I was sure we would love to go, but I would have to check with you. I think it would be great okay with you." The first thing that crossed my mind was, 5 days a week at work isn't enough. Now you want to be with him on the weekend too. I tried, but couldn't think of a reason not to go. With obvious displeasure, I said okay. Friday afternoon, Molly and I packed the car and headed to John and Gail's lake house. We had a map to show how to get there, but I tried to surprise her by asking, "Have you been there before?" She said she hadn't, but I'm not sure I believed her. We drove for about 50 miles, finally coming to the lake at about 4 o'clock. It took a while to find their house, but when we finally did, there were 4 people on the front porch waiting for us. The only one I knew was John. I assumed Gail was inside. In addition to John, the welcoming committee consisted of a very large, well-built man, a middle-aged woman who appeared to be his wife, and an extremely attractive 20-something woman. She had long red hair, and I would consider her to be beautiful. Everyone besides her had on shorts and a t-shirt. She had on a skimpy bikini. We parked and headed for the porch. After we were introduced to everyone, I asked John where Gail was. He said she wasn't there but gave no explanation as to why. It seemed a little strange that we came to visit John and Gail wasn't there. Probably because I had wondered for years about Molly and John's relationship, my spidey senses started getting active. Was John fooling around with this beautiful young woman? Did Gail find out? What does Molly know about this young lady? Molly didn't seem at all surprised to see her here. Molly and I were shown to our room. We dropped the small amount of luggage we brought and then joined the others in the great room. The building and the interior were very rustic and very large. I'd guess there were 5 bedrooms and as many baths. The very large man, introduced as Larry something, asked if I would like a beer. I said sure, and he motioned for me to follow him to the kitchen. He seemed very intent on getting me into a one-on-one conversation, so I talked to him for 10 to 15 minutes. He was a very pleasant man, but after a while I was ready to join the others. Strangely, as we came back into the great room, he loudly announced, "We're back." Even stranger, Molly and John were off in a corner, and I would swear they were surprised and just separating from a lover's hug. Both of them were red-faced and appeared to be stepping away from each other. I didn't like any part of what I'd seen so far. Gail's not here. Larry seemed to want to keep me talking in the kitchen. Who is the young, gorgeous girl? Molly seems to have been in an embrace with John. I had to ask Molly what was going on, so I started walking back to the kitchen and motioned for Molly to follow me. She had to see that I was at least confused and probably quite upset. Instead of following me into the kitchen, Molly stopped and asked John if there was someplace private where Molly and I could talk. No one seemed at all surprised at this request. My spidey senses were flaming at this point. John pointed out a room we could use, and Molly and I went in and closed the door. Molly, what in the world is going on? She had the expression of finally having to confront something that she was dreading talking about. Tom, I haven't been totally honest with you about this weekend, but please let me explain everything without interrupting. When I'm finished, I'll answer any question you have, and I'm sure you'll have many. First of all, Gail decided not to come this weekend. Gail, John, and I have had several meetings over lunch and dinner, planning this weekend. When I'm finished, I think you will see why you weren't invited to these meetings. Everything is basically Gail's idea, with some input from both John and me. John has accepted a promotion which will require a move to England. He and Gail will be moving in 2 weeks. His replacement will be a woman from the Cleveland office. I'm sure that John leaving, and a female replacement will please you. There are 3 things that I need to tell you about John and me. First of all, as I have always told you, John and I have never had an affair. We have never been in the same bed together. Secondly, and this is the hardest thing that I have ever had to tell you, I love you as much now as I ever have, but I also am in love with John. Let me emphasize, I didn't just say I love John, I said that I am in love with John. I couldn't be quiet any longer. I jumped to my feet and screamed. I can't believe it. You brought me to that man's house to tell me you're leaving me for that same man. I'm out of here. You can find your own way home. Oh, that's right, we don't have a home anymore. You're off to England with the man. I started to the door, as Molly grabbed my arm and yelled, "Please, Tom, that is not at all what I said. Please sit down and let me finish. I love you and I'm not leaving you ever, ever. You're my husband, and I will be with you until death do us part." I calmed just slightly and sat back down. Let me reiterate, everything is basically Gail's idea. I guess the next thing I should do, before continuing with why we are here this weekend, is tell you who the other people are and why they are here. The nice man that you talked to in the kitchen is Larry. He is head of security at our company and is only here to make sure everyone is happy. I broke in. So he is here to keep me in line, right? Molly didn't answer, just continued with introductions of the other people. Jackie, the beautiful girl, is here for you if you so desire. She is a sweetheart and also a high-end escort. The middle-aged Lady Janet is actually Larry's wife and also a great cook. A light suddenly went on in my head. The rest of this charade all of a sudden became quite clear. I could see exactly what Molly, John, and Gail had planned. Molly knew that John would be out of her life after this weekend. The 2 lovers, John and Molly, will take the weekend to finally be together as lovers. After that, John and his wife Gail will be off on their adventure in England. On Sunday, after I watch my wife make love to someone else all weekend, she and I will hold hands as we skip merrily to our car and live happily ever after. Is this woman crazy? They brought Larry in to make sure I didn't hurt John or just happen to drown my unfaithful wife. Jackie is here to offer me companionship, with the same goal as Larry, but a little different approach. All of this is to give John and Molly a weekend of love and intimacy. All right, Molly, I don't agree with any of this nonsense. Where on earth is Gail? You say this is all her idea. Where is she? She decided that for her emotional well-being, it would be best for her not to be here. In return for the weekend, John has signed a post-nuptial agreement that if he and I have contact, of any kind, at any time in the future, John would get nothing in a divorce. Gail gets 100% of the assets. I have signed a similar paper for you. Both papers begin when John and Gail leave for England. Since John and I work together, both papers also stipulate no sexual or romantic contact between this Sunday evening and when they leave for England. Tom, I will truly be all yours after this weekend, and I swear to spend the rest of my life making up for the hurt I'm causing you now. Why am I here when Gail isn't? I asked. Easy, there is no way that you would agree to let me come to John's lake house without you. Same reason you weren't invited to the planning luncheons. You would have just said no to everything. And what if I just say no to the whole thing now and ask you to either join me for an immediate trip back home, or you stay here with John and say goodbye to our marriage? I asked. Tom, it's not like that. Please understand that although you are my lifelong soulmate, I need this weekend with John for closure. Also, Gail is expecting a call from you. Since this is primarily her idea, she will explain everything to you. Her number is on the kitchen counter. Molly, I'm asking you one more time not to do this, I replied. Molly walked to me and gave a passionate kiss on my lips, then said, "It'll be okay, you'll see." Molly walked out of the room and took John by the hand as they disappeared from view. Larry kept his eye on me for the rest of the evening and constantly stayed between me and John. I thought seriously about just leaving and filing for divorce, but I had to know what this was all about and how far it would go. I found Jackie and told her, she is tempting, but I'm not going to help Molly shatter our wedding vows. Molly will have to do that all by herself. I told Jackie that, as far as I was concerned, she could go home, or if she is curious, she can stay and laugh at all the insanity. The next time I saw the lovers was at dinner. Janet obviously had been told where to seat everybody. John sat at the head of the table, Molly by him. Larry was between me and John with Jackie next to me. Janet, when she wasn't serving, sat across from her husband Larry. I assumed that by now my lovely wife had become an adulteress, thereby making me a cuckold. I noticed, probably at John's suggestion, that she was not wearing her wedding rings. The only thing I said through the whole meal was not good as I pointed out her bare finger. After dinner, Jackie put on a beautiful red bikini and went for a swim. I sat by the pool, rethinking my decision not to use her services. Then John and Molly came out hand in hand with swimsuits on. Larry sat by me and tried to start a conversation. It became quite evident that this whole charade had been choreographed. Shortly after everyone was around the pool, Molly came over and sat beside me. She leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "I love you, Tom. It'll all work out. We'll talk when we get home." I was thinking, this woman is nuts, as I quickly got up and walked away, telling her loud enough for all to hear, "Go away." I avoided everyone for the rest of the evening, except Larry, of course. He was always somewhere off in the distance, with his eye on me. I liked Larry. Other times we could be friends. I decided to call Gail. Maybe she could shed some light on this train wreck. She must have been expecting me. She answered on the first ring. She must have also added me to her caller ID. With a sad voice, she said, "How is this whole sad affair going? Are you still at the lake house?" "Gail, what on earth caused you to come up with this disaster?" "I don't know about you and John, but this is going to ruin my marriage to Molly," I replied. "Tom, let me explain my thinking. I admit that I was thinking of my own marriage to John. I didn't give a lot of thought to you and Molly. I think that women can move forward and forgive an affair more easily than men can. I know that John deeply loves Molly and has suffered for 4 years with her refusal of intimacy. She always told him that she wouldn't have a cheap affair behind your back. I offered them a compromise, a weekend of love, in exchange for not contacting each other ever again. I could just see them, thousands of miles apart, but in constant communication. I was afraid of where that might lead. If they ever communicate in the future, in any way it could financially destroy each of them. I didn't invite you to the planning luncheons because you would just say no to everything. On entering our bedroom, I discovered, not surprisingly, that the only luggage there was mine. Molly's stuff had been moved, so it was no longer our bedroom, just my bedroom. It made me very sad to think that Molly and John were now in their bedroom. Lying in bed, I kept wondering how Molly could think that after this weekend, she and I could just magically resume our loving relationship. All I could assume is that their 4-year emotional affair, without it being a sexual affair, has them thinking that the world owes them, and everyone will understand their needs. About midnight, Jackie knocked on the door and came in to ask if I was all right. She also inferred that she was still available if needed. I thanked her for the offer and told her my refusal was one of the hardest things I have ever done, but no thanks. She said that her room assignment was originally the same as mine, but that she had found an unassigned room. I couldn't sleep at all, so I went out by the pool. The hot tub was separated from the pool by a 3-foot rock wall, so I found a lounge chair and dragged it next to the hot tub. The sound of the water was soothing, and I eventually fell asleep. I slept for an hour or so, then was awakened by voices approaching the pool. I immediately recognized the voices of the two lovers. They couldn't see me, but I was only 10 feet away, hidden behind the short rock wall. Molly said, "Oh, John, this is so wonderful. I have loved you for so long, and I'm finally able to show you how much. I'm going to miss you, but we have 2 days to get in a lifetime of love. Let's get naked and make love in the pool. Get your suit off. I'll get us a couple of drinks." Molly got up and went to the kitchen for drinks. I felt like throwing up. I could see my whole life going to ruin because of this man. I hated him and hated Molly for the absolute total void that I was feeling. John was out of his suit waiting for Molly when I came up behind him. I yelled loud enough for everyone in the house to hear me, "Hey, Jerk." Jerk seemed to have become my nickname for him. As he turned, I kicked him, aiming for his lower region, hoping to totally spoil his weekend of being with my wife. He hadn't fully turned toward me, so I caught him in the lower abdomen. I was barefoot, so if I had been on target and hit the pelvic bone rather than the soft abdomen, I probably would have broken a couple of toes. He doubled over and fell backward into the pool. I knew Larry would be out of bed and on his way soon, but I didn't think there would be a physical confrontation with Larry. He might call me a few names but wouldn't want to face assault charges, and anyway, the damage to his boss had already been done, and Larry wouldn't be looking for revenge. Filed away in my mind was the fact that Molly came running to see if John was hurt, but didn't bother checking on me. I had seen enough. I got my bag, got in my car, and headed home. I did one thing before leaving, though. I took my wedding ring off and left it on the kitchen counter. Molly would maybe understand just how much she had hurt me. I spent the rest of the weekend sitting at home in my recliner, staring at the TV. I really didn't pay much attention to what was on. My mind was busy with pictures of my lovely wife with that jerk John. Since I had been to the lake house and knew the layout, I could picture them in various rooms, embracing with a big smile, kissing as they held each other overlooking the lake. In bed together with him, doing things only I should be doing, and her doing things that should be only for me. I wondered what she would say when she came home, if she came home. I really wished she wouldn't come home, but I don't know where else she would go. Sunday evening, a car pulled up and stopped in front of my house. It was John and Molly. They sat and held hands and talked for what must have been 15 minutes, occasionally kissing. Finally, he got out with the intention of coming around to open her car door. He apparently had asked Molly to wait and let him come around and open her door, obviously for my benefit. I think he forgot that the human body stiffens up after an injury, and then a long ride. He was wincing getting out of his door from the kick I had given him 2 days earlier. He needed to hold on to the 2 car fenders to work his way around to her side. He finally got to her side and opened her car door, looking quite uncomfortable. He helped Molly out of the car. It was more that Molly helped John get out of the car. I was pleased that my parting shot at the lake house obviously had hindered their love-making. This was all for my benefit, to show me that he was giving her back to me after she had stayed with him when she had a choice of him or me at the lake house. They held each other like lovers, not caring what I or the neighbors might think. I had had enough. I opened the front door and took a step toward John. "If you aren't out of here in 5 seconds, I'm going to do more than just kick you out." John limped quickly back to his car and drove away. I walked back into the house and sat in my recliner. Molly hadn't even watched him drive away. She walked in the front door wearing a fake smile. "I'm home, honey." Her attitude seemed so ridiculous, acting like she was just coming home from an evening out with the girls. I just ignored her and turned up the TV. She came over and tried to kiss me, but I pushed her away. The only thing I said to her was, "You're in the guest bedroom from now on. I'm going to a lawyer tomorrow and start the paperwork for a legal separation. Eventually, one of us will meet someone and want a divorce, but for now, we can coexist here. You can be free to replace your lost lover with whoever you want." I went back to watching TV. Molly started sobbing as she went up the steps. In one weekend, she had lost her lover and her husband. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up and drop a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm push my content further. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep creating more stories for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Who would have thought that the birth of my first grandchild would lead to the possible destruction of my 24-year marriage to Jane? I'm sitting in the back of this rented utility van, just up the street from my daughter's home, hoping what happens next doesn't finish what I considered a very loving and wonderful marriage. According to my daughter Sarah, Jane typically goes for a long jog around noon on the days she visits her grandson. Sarah says Jane comes back after an hour or so and looks fairly flushed from her workout. I'm here to see what Jane's workout consists of. My name is Bill Jones, and until a month ago I was living the dream. My business is doing great. I'm 47 years old and part owner of a fabrication plant that is on the cusp of a new patent that will revolutionize one of the plastic extrusion processes. If everything goes according to plan, I stand to make a few million on the patent even after sharing the profits with my co-inventor and the 5 investors who backed our development. Besides my work life, I thought my personal life was everything I could ask for. As I said, my wife seemed to love me and our life together. We have one child, Sarah, who we're both very proud to call our daughter. Sarah met, married, and got pregnant to a wonderful man 10 years her senior right after graduating from the university. The funny thing about Sarah is how easily she's taken to motherhood and being a full-time homemaker. Here's a girl, a woman really, but she'll always be my girl, who graduated with honors and had every intention of taking the financial world by storm. Sarah's graduation present from her mom and me was a full 6 weeks of touring Europe. It was her reward for finishing college in 3 years, bucking it up while most of her peers spent spring and summer breaks on the beach. Sarah met her future husband in Europe. She claims it was love at first sight, something she wouldn't have considered possible before that first evening in Madrid. She also claims it was fate. Jim Taylor was from Jane's hometown of Olympia. When Sarah returned from her European tour, she moved into her grandparents' house, Jane's folks, and within 6 months she was engaged to Jim. Within 18 months she was married and pregnant with our first grandchild. Jane couldn't have been more excited. She immediately cut her hours at work so she could spend time with Sarah and the baby. Okay, so now you know my work life is great. I'm a very happy papa or grandpa or father-in-law. That brings us to my marriage to Jane. Jane and I met at the University of Washington. I was a senior and Jane had transferred in from Washington State. We had a class together, one of those entry-level classes required to graduate. Jane was, and still is, a very attractive woman. She's 5 foot 8 inches, athletically built. She's been a runner since high school, with a great smile and beautiful hazel eyes. I was smitten the first day I saw her, but our few conversations after class led me to back off since she seemed reserved. By the time the quarter ended, I worked up enough courage and she accepted my invitation to go out. One date led to another and things were looking good for a long-term romance. I found out the reason for her reservation after our 3rd or 4th date. She was getting over a very bad breakup. Jane caught the boy she dated for 2 years in high school and 2 years at WSU in bed with another girl. Jane humiliated herself by accepting his indiscretion for almost 3 months before finally giving him an ultimatum. He had to choose. This guy was pretty full of himself by this time and blatantly chose both, suggesting a 3-way. Jane had enough, left school soon after, and transferred to the university. I guess that made me a rebound romance. The subject seemed to hurt Jane and it was never brought up again. I'm fairly certain Jane and I had a pretty good marriage and that she was a faithful, loving wife for the next 23 years. Although there were minor disagreements from time to time, we never went to bed without working those problems out and at least kissing each other goodnight. I never strayed, sure I looked sometimes, but was never tempted to ruin a good thing by crossing that line. Jane caught me once in a while eyeing a woman at the beach or on the dance floor. She'd lightly slug my shoulder and say, "Remember, you can look, but not for too long and never touch." She always did this with a smile and a gleam in those eyes. So, what happened? When Sarah had her son, William, Jane decided she needed to spend time with Sarah and Bill Jr., as we call him. One day a week, Jane would get in her car and drive 60 miles from our home in North Seattle to Olympia. Not far by measured miles, but anyone who's driven that stretch knows it takes hours to go from point A to point B. After a couple of months of driving back and forth on the same day, and with winter coming on, Sarah bought a daybed and put it in their study so Jane could spend the night. Jane could drive south in the morning of the first day and come home prior to rush hour on the second. I used the evenings Jane was away to work on the patent. This new routine worked out so well that Jane continued to stay overnight in Olympia even after the weather improved the next spring. Saturday, June 27th, was Bill Jr.'s first birthday. Sarah and Jim planned a barbecue in their large backyard to celebrate the event. Two minor incidents occurred during the picnic. Both played a role in putting the pieces of this mystery together. I was sitting in a nice lounge chair having a cold beer when Jim and Sarah joined me. They caught me staring at Jane. Jim was the first to speak. "You're a lucky man, Dad." I must admit that I took my father's advice and looked at Sarah's mother to see how my future wife would look when she's 40 before proposing. Sarah gave him a slug on the shoulder, just like her mom always did to me. "You pig? I can't believe you'd say such a thing. What if my mother wasn't such a babe? Would you have dumped me?" I tried to save Jim. "It's true, Sarah. I did the same thing. One look at your grandmother convinced me that your mom was a keeper." With that, Sarah gave me a punch on my shoulder. "Okay, Dad, but what are we girls supposed to do? Look at your fathers." "In that case, I better like looking at a shiny bald head." The three of us looked over at Jim's dad manning the barbecue and laughed. Jim's dad is a great guy and good-looking, but he's fighting the male baldness thing by letting his hair grow and trying to comb it over. Right now, the wind was blowing it around, and he looked like a certain future president. "Well, anyway, you're right, Jim. I'm a lucky man. How many men are married to a 45-year-old woman who has the body of a 30-year-old? Sarah replied. "She should be in good shape with all the running she does. Every day she's here, Mom takes off by noon and spends at least an hour running to the waterfront and back. I don't know how she can do it." "Yeah, she runs at least 4 days a week at home. Once or twice a week I go out with her and she runs me ragged. She'll do 4 miles at a 7-minute mile pace. I think she's going to try for the half marathon this fall. You have to hand it to her." About this time, Jim's dad, Jeff, called everyone over and started serving the grilled corn on the cob and burgers, including some surprisingly good veggie burgers, the first I've ever tasted. I sat with Jeff and Jim, and we compared work notes. Jeff had a restaurant supply business and he was grooming Jim to take over when it was time to retire in 10 years or so. After the meal, I went inside to grab a few beers for the three of us, and just before I walked out the patio door, something caught my eye in the house behind Jim and Sarah's. I took a step back into the house and focused my eyes. Sure enough, Jim and Sarah's backyard neighbor was standing at an upstairs window looking over into our yard with a set of binoculars. I couldn't tell for certain, but it looked as if he was watching the table where Jane, Sarah, and Jim's mom were sitting. As I moved back through the patio door, the neighbor quickly lowered the binoculars and stepped back from the window. "Jim, what's the deal with the neighbor behind you?" "I just saw him staring over here with binoculars." Both Jim and Jeff took their beers and gave me a look like, "What the hell? That's Alan Ross? He's actually a salesman for one of our main vendors and the guy gives me the creeps. We had a neighborhood watch block party last year, and even though the guy doesn't live on our block, he shows up." Everyone thought it was a bit strange. I caught him more than once staring at Sarah, so I went over and talked to him. He of course recognized me, was surprised we were neighbors, and apologized. He said Sarah reminded him of someone he knew back in high school. I let it go, but it was strange. "Well, I hope you keep the curtains in your back bedroom closed." What an asshole. But something about this rang a small bell in my head. It was a long afternoon, and by the time Jane and I headed home, I forgot about the kid's neighbor. It wasn't until Sunday morning that I remembered. Jane was out on one of her runs and I was having my second cup of coffee, so I went over to the bookcase and pulled out one of Jane's high school yearbooks. We keep all that nostalgic stuff with the photo albums in the den. I looked up the name Alan Ross, and much to my surprise, there was a handwritten note in the margin. "Jane, it's been 2 great years with you. And just as your favorite song says, we've only just begun. I am looking forward to next year at WSU and all the years after. Your love forever, Al." So, it was Jane's old boyfriend who was living right behind Sarah and Jim. Did she know? If she knew, why didn't she say anything? These and dozens of other questions swirled around in my head until Jane came home and took her shower. By the time she came downstairs, I had a fruit and yogurt smoothie waiting for her. As usual, Jane had that fresh, flushed, and glowing look about her. She looked so beautiful, I almost chickened out, but I sucked in my breath and asked the million-dollar question. "Jane, do you know an Alan Ross?" Jane's answer was so fluid, in retrospect, it was almost as if she anticipated the question and was ready with her answer. I knew an Alan Ross in high school. We even dated for a while. Why do you ask? Jane's answer took me by surprise, and I decided to play the rest of the hand close to the vest. He lives behind Sarah and Jim. When Jim caught Ross looking at Sarah, he called him out, and Ross said she reminded him of a girl he knew in high school. Given how much Sarah looks like you at that age, I wondered if you weren't the girl he was talking about. It could be. But why bring it up? Did something happen? Not really, but I think I saw him watching us from his house yesterday. It just seemed a little odd, that's all. Then events cascaded to this moment with me sitting in this rented van. First, the next time I went into the den, Jane's senior year yearbook was no longer on the shelf. It was like a punch to the stomach. I had to sit down in my leather chair and catch my breath. What the hell is going on? That's when Sarah's comment at yesterday's lunch came screaming back into my brain. Every day Mom takes off for an hour to run, the implications were too awful to contemplate. My Jane with another man? Should I confront Jane? Should I talk to Sarah? Or maybe hire a private detective? I remember reading something where someone asked the question, you have to ask yourself, will you be better off without her? I didn't think I could tolerate Jane's adultery, but would I divorce her? That's a question I couldn't answer that night, especially with what little information I had. I went upstairs, took a sleeping pill, and went to bed. I don't even remember if I kissed Jane goodnight, but I must have because she didn't bring it up Monday at breakfast. For the next 2 days, things were way too hectic at work to consider my personal issues. Our investors were in town Monday and Tuesday to chart our progress on the patent. It would be impossible to answer their questions and at the same time try to come up with a plan of action related to my marriage. I'd have plenty of time once the investors left Tuesday afternoon. I sucked it up and got to work. Late Tuesday afternoon, I dropped the investors off at SeaTac. As I headed back to the house I called Jane's cell, she was spending Tuesday and Wednesday at Sarah's. When Jane didn't answer her cell, I called Sarah. Sarah, hi. I tried to call your mom, but she didn't pick up. Is she there? No, Dad. Mom went over to Cindy Sullivan's tonight. I think she's an old classmate of Mom's. Funny, she never talked about her before. Is this a regular thing with Cindy? Not regular, maybe every few weeks she goes and meets someone she knew when she lived here. She's usually home by 10 unless she's had too much wine and spends the night. Mom says it's always nice to get together with the women she grew up with. She says she still feels closer to the small-town girls than she does to the women up in Seattle. After living here in Olympia for the past 3 years, I can see her point. Yeah, it's too bad your mom never really clicked with the Nordstrom crowd. She always has been more comfortable in jeans and boots. Maybe when I retire we can make that happen. Make it soon, Dad. Jim and I are planning to have more babies, and it would be nice if all 4 of their grandparents lived close by. Sarah, you never cease to amaze me. I never dreamed my ambitious little go-getter would be talking about having a passel of kids. Just found my dream guy and found out I like being a mom. You and Mom can take most of the blame. Okay, Sarah. I'm pulling into the drive now. It's a nice night, and I think I'm going to jump on the Harley and take a long ride this evening. Tell your mother I won't be answering my phone because I'm on the bike. Good night, Dad. Ride safe. It was a nice night for a ride, and I had a destination in mind for this evening's ride. By the time I pulled into Alan Ross's neighborhood, it was dark. Just enough light as I rode slowly past his house to see a red Mustang Boss 429 in the drive in front of the 2-car garage, and no sign of Jane's Volvo. I was just about ready to give the bike some throttle when something made me pause. The license plate was one of those vanity plates the state sold for a premium. It had a WSU Cougar emblem on the plate, and the license number was Ross Boss. Why would a guy park his expensive sports car in the drive instead of in the garage? I rode a block and a half down the street to a school. It had one of those circular drives in front of the school buses. I parked the bike and pretended to do some repairs on the Harley. I had the seat off, just in case. I kept an eye on Ross's house while I pretended to fiddle away. Lucky thing, too. Olympia is still a small enough town that a guy on a motorcycle can attract attention. Within a half hour, a police officer stopped nearby. Need anything? Need anything? Not really, but thanks for asking, officer. I thought maybe I had a short in the electrical system, but it turns out the last mechanic didn't tighten the negative cable on the battery. I'm just finishing up and I'll be gone in 10 minutes. I made certain to look the officer in the eye while we chatted. What ya going to do if that doesn't fix it? He asked. My daughter and her husband live on 3rd. I'll just walk it down there. But I think I have it. Thanks again. The cop took off, but I saw him cruise by a few streets down when I was putting on my helmet. The bike was started and the headlight was on, so he left me alone. It was very dark now and Ross's Mustang hadn't moved. The next bit was going to be tricky and maybe more than embarrassing if I was wrong and got caught. I started toward Ross's house with enough speed to cut the engine and coast to the front of his house. I stopped the bike, ran up the driveway, and had to get on my toes to look inside the garage through the windows near the top of the garage door. On the right side was a Mercedes S-Class convertible, and on the left side was my wife's Volvo. I don't know how I did it. Maybe the past 3 days led me to believe that I'd find exactly what I did find, and it wasn't as much of a surprise. But I had the presence of mind to jog back to the Harley, fire it up, and take off like a bat out of hell. I rode for 20 minutes, pulled into a tavern near the military base, and took out my cell. This time Jane picked up. Hi Bill, Sarah said you were out riding tonight. Are you home? Almost. How about you? What are you up to? I asked. I'm over at Cindy Sullivan's, an old friend from grade and high school. I think I'll end up spending the night here. I've had a couple of glasses of wine and I think I'm over the limit. I feel okay, just don't want to take a chance. That's good thinking. Listen, I needed to talk to you tonight because the meeting with the investors ran into a couple of snags. I'm flying out tomorrow and won't be back until this all gets straightened out. Sorry to spring this on you at the last minute. Oh, Bill, I'm going to miss you. If you're going to be out of town, is it okay if I stay here in Olympia until you get back? You know how much I hate staying home by myself. No, you go ahead and stay with Sarah. I'll give you a heads up before flying home. It should be Saturday at the latest. Bye. Bye, Bill, I love you. Damn, why did she have to go and say that? It just made her betrayal that much worse. I really wasn't going out of town, of course. I just didn't want to deal with Jane while I set up the rest of my life. I rode home trying to see through a couple of misty eyes. I don't think I'm a pussy, but I'm not ashamed to say a few tears fell and quite a few curse words crossed my lips while thinking about 25 years with the woman I loved more than myself, the mother of my daughter and the grandmother of our beautiful grandson. I wondered if my life would ever be happy again. Wednesday, I called my business partner, explained the situation, and told him I'd be out for a few days. He was sympathetic and said the usual nice things to commiserate, but deep down he was probably thinking how this would affect our deal. I can't say I blame him if that's really what was on his mind. We were so close to making a small fortune, and here I am dumping a load on top of it. Then a call to our lawyer for a reference for a divorce attorney, making certain he knew it had to be a very good one, maybe the best. There was no way I would split millions with a cheating whore who may end up with an asshole, spending my money on cars and whatever. The attorney I was referred to understood the urgency of the situation and agreed to meet me that evening in his office. He was upfront about it. I could count on paying him a handsome premium for the after-hours meeting to clear his calendar and expedite the paperwork, but he assured me it would be worth my money. I checked into a local hotel and called Jane at noon. Of course, she didn't answer. Whether she was actually running or was jumping Ross's bones at that moment was irrelevant. I just wanted to avoid any conversation. I left her a message that I'd be tied up in meetings, but would call her tonight. When I met with the attorney that evening, he had his act together, obviously not his first time dealing with this situation. He listened to my tale of woe and my desire to go forward without getting scalped. He said the paperwork would be ready by Friday morning and gave me the getting separated checklist. Accounts to close, items to label, how I wanted to handle notifying Jane, etc. When he heard my plan for giving Jane the divorce papers, he started to shake his head. I assured him I could do it without ending up in jail. He said he still advised against it, but he could understand my motivation. Just don't be stupid. Thursday, I went down the checklist. One credit card was left open, the one Jane carried, but the credit line was reduced from $30,000 to $10,000. We paid off the balance every month, so there was little danger this would alert Jane before the day of reckoning. Friday morning at 8 a.m. I was sitting in the attorney's lobby. He almost smiled when he walked in the door. He went right to his desk and handed me the envelope sitting there with my name on it. I signed where I needed to, and he reminded me as I walked out the door, remember, I said don't be stupid. I drove to the rental car office at SeaTac on my way south to Olympia and drove away with a white utility van. Here I sit down the block from Alan Ross's house, waiting to see if this is the day my marriage blows up forever. At 1:45, Jane comes around the corner wearing her jogging gear. She heads toward Ross's house, up the steps, reaches under a planter, and lets herself in the door, just like it's her home. At 1:55, Alan Ross pulls up in his Mercedes and parks in the garage. At 1:56, I drive the van over to Sarah's house. Sarah is surprised to see me, but not as surprised as when I tell her why I'm there. I tried to tell her in a way that wouldn't shock her, but that's probably unrealistic. I asked her to call her husband Jim and meet us at home as soon as he could get away. I knew when this was over that Sarah would need Jim's strength. No, Dad, no. That just can't be true. Mom loves you. She'd never cheat on you, and I can't be that stupid. If she was cheating, I'd know. You must have it all wrong. Sarah, I'd give anything for it not to be true. I loved your mother for over 25 years. Damn, we were going to celebrate our 25th anniversary next year. But let me tell you what I saw. I told Sarah all the evidence I had so far. Sarah remained reluctant to believe. We picked Bill Jr. out of his crib and took Sarah's car with Jr. in his car seat around the corner and parked in front of Alan Ross's house. Sarah stayed in the car while I went to the front door with the manila envelope. I had to ring and knock before the shithead answered the door in his bathrobe. Who the fuck are you, pleasant guy? I'm Jane's husband. Can you please call her to come to the door? I want to talk to her. He stood there with his mouth hanging open. He tried to shut the door, but I was prepared for that and stuck my foot in the jam. It hurt like hell, but kept the door open. I busted it open with my shoulder and yelled inside, "Jane, come here right now." Ross kept pushing on the door, but it wasn't doing him any good because now my torso was in the way. I kept yelling for Jane to come to the door. I don't know how, but I kept my cool and didn't threaten either Ross or Jane, but I did keep shouting for her to come to the door. When Jane finally appeared, she had her jogging gear back on. I'm assuming she was naked when Ross answered the door. She had a frightened look in those eyes I loved. Bill, what's going on? Why are you here? That's not the real question, Jane. The real question is, why are you here? I took this opportunity to grab the lapel of Ross's robe and pull it open. He was naked underneath the robe, of course. Jane looked past me at this moment. The three of us were still standing at the door. I turned around and saw what Jane was staring at. Sarah was out of her car and watching the entire episode. You had to bring our daughter. The bitch was mad at me. No, she wanted to come because she said there was no way her mother could be cheating on our marriage. She was anxious to prove this was all a figment of my imagination. And you can be pissed at me all you want, but I didn't make this mess, you did. I was starting to lose it, so needed to back out now. I handed Jane the manila envelope. She touched it as if I handed her a live grenade. I'll be staying with Jim and Sarah tonight. You can stay with your long-lost boyfriend. Read the paperwork. Get a lawyer. Don't come home until you understand what's in those papers and you can abide by the terms. I'll have Jim bring your suitcase and personal items from their house. I don't know what Sarah and Jim are going to do from now on. That's their decision. But you and I are getting a divorce. Goodbye, Jane. I turned and walked away. I thought I heard a wail from Jane, but Ross was slamming the door too hard to tell for certain. Dad, I'm so sorry. You better drive us back to the house. I don't think I can make it. Sarah practically collapsed in my arms as I opened the passenger door for her. While my life sucked from that moment and for months to come, I don't think it compared to how much worse it was for Jane. Jim was shocked when he was told about Jane and Alan Ross. He was so pissed that for months he refused to allow Jane in their home or to see her grandson. Sarah didn't argue with Jim. If Jim was pissed, Sarah was livid. I was in their home when Jane called Sarah to talk. Sarah basically called her own mother everything short of unfaithful woman and told Jane that she may never forgive her for breaking her father's heart. Ross lost the Taylor account, and thanks to a call from Jeff Taylor to Ross's boss, eventually lost his job. Ross blamed Jane for his run of bad luck and ended up throwing her out of his house. Jane ended up moving in with her folks. Sarah later told me Jane's mother and father weren't happy with the situation, but realized Jane didn't have too many alternatives until the divorce and the financial settlement was finalized. The divorce was final within 6 months. My battery of lawyers worked it out that Jane doesn't get a thing from the sale of the patent. They were able to shield almost all the money because the patent was sold to a foreign company and my portion was placed in an offshore trust. Don't ask me how. All I know is it cost me 6 figures. This made it all work, but it kept the money out of Jane's hands. She did get plenty, half the sale of our house, half of our savings, but well short of millions. Soon after the divorce, I did get a letter from Jane, but it didn't explain why she cheated. Maybe her excuses made sense to her, but not to me. It contained the usual excuses: empty nest, feeling lonely, needing closure with Ross. What the letter didn't explain was why she would jeopardize what I thought was a great marriage just for such bullshit reasons. Jane reacted poorly to her new reality, the loss of her marriage, the separation from Sarah and Bill Jr., and finally the second separation from Ross. Her behavior became erratic. She started drinking and continued to go downhill. Jane ended up going into rehab at her parents' incident. I suppose most jilted husbands would feel some pleasure from seeing their unfaithful ex-wife get what she deserves, and there are times when a small smile crossed my lips thinking of her suffering. But let's face it, I loved this woman for so many years trying to shield her from pain. How could I just stop caring? Thank goodness for the support I received from my kids. I may have been uneasy about destroying my ex-wife, but I had no qualms about messing with Ross. I got a chuckle out of a couple of things Jim did even after his dad got Ross fired. One evening, Jim looked over the back fence and saw Ross entertaining a young woman. Jim went to the fence, called the woman over, and proceeded to ask how she felt hanging out with a guy who fucked a married woman, then dumped her when the woman needed him. Jim laughed when the woman walked out the side gate. He watched as Ross walked out of his back door carrying 2 wine glasses and looking around the yard for his date. Jim did the same thing a few weeks later when Ross was entertaining a group of friends in his backyard. Jim stood at the fence and asked the group what they thought of their scumbag friend. But the last straw for Ross came a month later when I was helping the kids with their move to a new home. Sarah had to get away from Ross, and they needed a bigger place since Sarah was pregnant again. Ross was out back cutting his lawn. I told Jim to wait a couple of minutes, then start recording the scene on his smartphone, but make certain to put his thumb over the microphone. I jumped over the fence and started to talk to Ross in a low voice. I said a few things to get him riled. Ross was so pissed that he took the bait. Jim caught it on video. I was standing with my hands at my side when Ross took the first swing. I was ready for it and ducked enough to only get clipped. My first roundhouse caught Ross right in the nose. The sound of his nose crunching and the sight of the blood made my heart swell. The second roundhouse caught Ross in the solar plexus. Ross doubled over and began puking. I had to back up fast to avoid getting my shoes covered with his bile. As he leaned over puking, I grabbed his ear, twisted the hell out of it, and whispered, "Next time you won't be so lucky. Next time you'll get seriously hurt." Ross was still doubled over when I walked out of his yard through the front. Somehow his Mercedes got keyed. I immediately went to the police station with Jim. My story was Ross invited me over to his yard. I figured it was to apologize, but when I got there, Ross took a swing at me and I only defended myself. Jim showed the cops his recording and I swore out a complaint of assault. Hours later, Ross got out of the emergency room and headed to the police station to swear out a complaint against me. The whole episode came down to he said, and I ended up walking out of the courthouse scot-free. It's funny, I spent my entire career believing in the win-win philosophy. Always looking for a way for both parties to a contract to walk out of the room feeling good. There's nothing win-win in a divorce, at least nothing I can point to. It's definitely lose-lose, no matter how bad you stick it to your cheating ex-spouse. It's been 2 years since that awful afternoon sitting in that rented van. I wish I could say that I met a 30-something bikini model who pledged her everlasting love and fidelity to me, but we all know life isn't really that kind. I had 24 great years with the woman I loved with all my heart. I have 2 great kids, yes, I consider Jim to be a son, and now 2 great grandchildren. Financially, I'm in great shape. Do you know how many men get shafted by the system and end up living in a 1-room apartment while supporting a cheating ex-wife? Too many, but at least that's not my fate. No, I have enough money to live comfortably and even travel. I'm currently spending a month touring Italy on a Ducati. Even took in the Moto di pieces in Mugello. But as I sit having an espresso outside a cafe in Florence, I have to fight back the tears. Jane and I always said we'd do this together, tour Italy on a motorcycle with no deadlines and only each other. Now I'm doing it without her. Jane did get out of rehab, but still lives with her parents. Sarah and Jim allow her to visit her grandchildren for no more than an hour every month. I think Sarah does this as a form of torture. She still hasn't forgiven her mother. The question haunts me, how could she do this to us? Life isn't a movie where every question is answered before the credits. It's more like a Joseph Conrad novel. Life just is, and often absurd, and the good guys don't always win. I finish my espresso, put the helmet back on, start the bike, and ride into my own heart of darkness. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up and drop a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm push my content further. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep creating more stories for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. My name is Otto Klein. As the owner of several waste management companies, I am known as the Garbage King. I was married to Janet Carson. She was a lawyer and had kept her maiden name for her professional life. Evidently, her whole life is professional since she made no effort to present herself in social settings with anything other than her maiden name. My occupation in waste management was fine with her when I was paying for her expensive law school costs. She decided to go to law school after several years of working as a paralegal and realized she was as sharp as most of the lawyers she worked for. Even though I own several successful companies and make more money than most of the godlike barristers she worked with. Janet started looking down on me as second class soon after she got a job with a law firm. When the late nights, diminished intimacy, and increased disrespect spiked over several weeks, I suspected she had started an affair. Since gods don't mate with common folk, I assumed she was seeing one or more of her fellow lawyers. I quickly decided I needed to get proof that would withstand legal scrutiny. If I had just divorced her, she would have gotten half of my business and considerable wealth. If I could get proof of her infidelity with another of her lawyers, I could probably sue her agency. The law firm would probably pay quite a bit to avoid the embarrassment and possible loss of clients, therefore, I might make enough to compensate for what I would have to give her in divorce. My logic may have been faulty, but that's what it was at the time. That's what I based my actions on. Janet's office has an annual Christmas party. Every year Janet invites me and every year I decline. Until this year. She was shocked and immediately tried to come up with reasons for me to stay home. There won't be anyone there for you to talk to, just a bunch of lawyers bragging about their billing hours. Do you really want to sit and hear that all night? I don't care as long as I'm with you, is what I said. As long as I can keep an eye on you and see if I can figure out who your lover is, was what I was thinking. Almost every day before the party, Janet would mention another excuse I could give if I wanted to back out. I didn't fall for it. I told her I was looking forward to going to the party. Even as she was getting ready the night of the gala event, she tried one last time. I hate to see you have a miserable time. Are you sure you want to go? Yes, dear. I knew her problem wasn't that my physical appearance was embarrassing to her. I have been told I am fairly handsome and in good shape, and my suit was Armani. I was no slob. I just worked with garbage. She didn't like it when I said that's what she does too. We got to the party with the second wave of people who were trying to be fashionably late. Most tables were already full, but we soon found one near the dance floor where only one other couple had settled so far. We took our seats and I offered to get drinks for Janet and myself. My first confrontation of the night occurred when I was standing in line to get our beverages. A man who appeared to be one of the lawyers with the firm said, "I don't believe I've met you before. Who are you here with?" I answered, "My wife, Janet Carson Klein." "Janet? I didn't think she was still married," he replied. "Yeah, we've been married happily for 8 years. Of course, we've been married for over 10 years. He looked stunned for a second, and then started laughing at what he assumed was a joke from me. That proved to me that truth is often funnier than fiction. On more than one occasion, I overheard the Garbage King label used in conjunction with my nearby presence. Their comment was usually followed by snarky laughter. I was not really that upset. I had assumed correctly in the previous years how I would be treated by these snobs. I was considered lower class if not gutter-level scum. I watched as Janet mingled with various lawyers, paralegals, secretaries, and their spouses or dates for the evening. At the table, she spoke politely with the others seated with us during the meal. When the dancing started, I decided to give it a try. I asked my wife to dance. She looked like she could barely tolerate being seen with me. I didn't care. I tried to dominate the slow dances, but before long I was cut in on several times. Then she managed to accept several invitations from other lawyers for both fast and slow dances. I gave up and just sat back so I could watch her even more closely. It was about an hour after the dancing started that a middle-aged, distinguished-looking man came up to our table. He only looked at Janet. Unlike most others, he did not ask my permission. He was claiming her more than asking her to dance. Janet's face lit up when she saw him. She eagerly accepted and stood up without ever looking at me for my approval. I thought, we may have a winner. My focus was totally on them as observed them dance a slow dance. There was enough in her body language to feed my suspicion, but nothing overt enough to warrant a picture that would be damning. So, was my hunch sufficient as proof of their being lovers? No. Luckily, I had another source of information, an unusual source of information. I had never told Janet that I had been recruited out of college by the CIA. It was found out that I had a highly accurate skill in reading lips. I had several successful covert missions and was being trained in lip reading, a Middle Eastern foreign language. My time in the CIA, however, did not last long, as one of those infamous whistleblowers blew my cover along with everyone else in my section. I was not interested in a desk job, so I left the company. I stood up and positioned myself so I could see what Janet was saying to her dance partner. I was not able to see his face from in front most of the time. This is what I saw. Janet: did you get the room for tonight? Him: room 322. Did you put? Janet: yes, I just put it in his drink a few minutes ago. Him: it shouldn't take. Janet: I can't believe you plan for us to make love in the same room my husband is sleeping in. That is so naughty and dangerous. Him: you love the... Pretend you don't. Janet: are you sure he won't wake up too soon? Him: don't. Plenty of. Are you still? Janet: don't worry about me. If I promised you, you'll get it. Oh, Stanley, I am so ready. That was enough for me. I immediately spilled the rest of the doctored drink on myself and the table. I excused myself and took off toward the restrooms. I passed the restrooms and headed for the exit. I was hoping either I had not taken enough of the drug to be affected yet, or it was not that strong of dosage. I was wrong on both counts. Beeping monitors, bright lights, and alcohol smells were my greeting back to consciousness. It appears I had a car wreck when I fell asleep at the wheel driving home from the party. I looked around and saw a nurse. I was about to ask her a question when I saw Janet come into the room. I immediately sat up and yelled, "Get that bitch out of here." Janet ran out of the room. Once she left, I was still yelling, "She's the one who almost got me killed. I want to talk to a policeman now." The nurse tried to calm me down. The medical staff assumed I was having some kind of psychotic episode. I calmed down and told them, "I'll try to explain this in terms you can understand. I will sue you personally and the hospital in general if you do not get a policeman here in the next 15 minutes. I have been drugged. Do a tox screen for liquid Benadryl and other knockout drugs. I think my wife and her lover almost got me killed. I exaggerated what I knew of the situation, but it worked. Within 15 minutes, a police officer was taking my statement that I had overheard my wife and her lover talking about drugging me and taking my body off somewhere so they could be intimate. I didn't mention that I heard by lip reading. I figured drugging and attempted kidnapping ought to stir some action. I was told I needed to come to the police station after I left the hospital to swear out a complaint. I told them I would unless I got kidnapped or killed by them when I left the hospital. The officer didn't seem particularly concerned for my safety. While I waited to be discharged, a nurse came in to tell me the results of the toxicology report. I had been drugged big time. In fact, based on the amount of drugs I had in my system, if I had drunk the full glass, it would likely have killed me. The hospital staff had reported that to the police already. I heard the phrase attempted murder for the first time. Before long, there was a policeman stationed outside my door, and the second officer who interviewed me was more serious in her interest. I went to my house when I was discharged the next day. A police car passed my house on a regular basis, however. I was not in danger. Janet was not in our house, just all her stuff was. I found out that Janet had been arrested earlier at our house. She and her lover had come here in hopes of convincing me to not tell the law firm about their scheduled tryst in the hotel. That was the only crime they thought they had committed. She and Stanley were charged, however, with attempted murder. I imagine she collapsed when she heard the charge as the police put her in handcuffs. The two lawyers, as you might expect, refused to speak without another lawyer. The district attorney wanted to try the two separately. He thought if Janet saw she was going to be convicted, she would testify against Stanley Proust, her lover and a junior partner with the firm. The DA was not successful. The two cases were intertwined, so they would be tried together. Janet tried to talk to me before the trial. She left messages regarding her innocence in trying to kill me. I guess she didn't think cheating on me mattered since she didn't bother apologizing for that. I ignored the rest of her messages. I quickly withdrew all funds out of our joint accounts and cut all the other financial umbilical cords she was attached to. Her father had to pay her lawyer until her lawyer eventually forced me to return her half. At their trial, the toxicology report of the drugs in my system was the chief evidence. There was a forensic chemist expert in poisonings, knockout drugs, and date-rape drugs who told me the scientific name of the drug I was given and the danger I would have been in had I drunk the whole amount. I was the star witness. Lip-reading accuracy, particularly my lip-reading ability, was the main issue for the defense regarding my testimony. How could I possibly be so sure of what I saw? Most lip readers perform at just above 50% accuracy. I had several CI staff testify as to my proficiency being above the average. I even gave a demonstration to the court. The defense's attorney next tried to offer an alternative theory of what happened with the claim that I had actually drugged myself in order to accuse my wife and her lover of attempted murder. If convicted, I would be assured I would get all the assets in the divorce plus a nice settlement from a lawsuit against the law firm. In truth, I wish I had been capable of being that devious. The judge was not impressed by how I expressed in open court how stupid I considered the claim of the defense attorney. When the defense had their turn, neither Janet nor Stanley testified. They had another forensic chemist testify that the drug would likely not have killed me. They had a sign language expert testify as to the general inaccuracy of lip reading. I loved it when my lawyer asked him if some lip readers were more accurate than others. He said, "Of course." Then he was asked if he ever saw me to determine how accurate I was. He had to admit he hadn't. The only other witness was a police officer, Sergeant Haskins, who had interviewed the people who shared our table at the party. He testified that no one at the table had reported they had seen my wife put anything in my drink. The defense rested. The defense's conclusion. No one saw Stanley give Janet any powder. No one saw Janet put anything into my drink. There was no proof I had not done it myself. As soon as the police officer finished testifying, an older lady in the gallery kept trying to get the district attorney's attention. It was causing a disruption, so the district attorney sent an assistant to see what she was so upset about. The assistant hurried back and said, "Recess now." The DA asked for and got a 15-minute recess as the district attorney went back to talk to the lady. I happened to look over at Janet, and she seemed horrified at seeing the woman. She immediately started a strained conversation with her lawyer. The district attorney came back after recess and requested that a rebuttal witness be allowed to testify. He was asked whose testimony was being rebutted. Police Officer Haskins. Janet prodded her lawyer to speak. "Your Honor, I am requesting another recess in which time I will be presenting a change in plea by my client." Stanley and his lawyer went crazy. The word bitch was used several times. In the conference, Janet and her lawyer said she would agree to a guilty plea and a 3 to 5 year sentence in return for testifying against Stanley. The district attorney agreed. The old lady had told the district attorney that the police officer had asked her if she had seen Janet put knockout powder in my drink. He didn't ask if Janet put anything in my drink, so she said no to the knockout drug question. He did not ask her another question. The lady related that she had seen Janet put something in my drink. Janet had told her that it was medicine that would lessen the hangover that I supposedly always got from drinking too much. She said no to it being knockout drugs because she thought it was hangover medicine. It took several months more for Janet's guilty plea and sentence to be announced. Stanley got a new trial which featured Janet as chief witness. She described in detail of Stanley had pursued her and begun their affair. She swore she only wanted to deceive me, and that Stanley had determined the drug and the amount. Stanley countered that he had only done what Janet asked him to do, and that she had purposefully given me too much of the drug knowing the likely deadly consequences. Stanley's lawyer therefore proposed a new theory. Janet had seduced him and planned all along to frame Stanley and kill me. That way she would be rid of a husband who would leave a nice inheritance and get rid of a lover whose position as a junior partner would most likely go to her. My car crash messed up her plan. Stanley cried at the thought that he might be capable of harming another human being. The bottom line was that the jury believed Janet more than Stanley. He was convicted and sentenced to 10 to 15 years in prison. I was allowed to testify at his sentencing hearing. I said with tears in my eyes, "I should not be here today. I should be buried in a grave in Riverside Cemetery. Instead of sitting in that padded chair, my wife's lover should be standing beside my grave helping my wife celebrate their successful disposal of the garbage man. She should have inherited a lot of money. She should be out spending my money with her lover and fellow assassin. Don't be fooled. Neither one of them is upset I almost died. They are upset that I didn't die and got caught.